أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين. وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وآله الطيبين الطاهرين.
اللهم صل على محمد
اللهم اخرجنا من ظلمات الوهم وأكرمنا بالنور الفهم. اللهم افتح علينا أبواب رحمتك وانشر علينا من خزائن علومك يا أرحم الراحمين. اللهم علمنا ما ينفعنا وانفعنا بما علمتنا وزدنا علما. My brothers, my sisters, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. You'll notice every day I begin with that dua. This is a very special dua. It would be amazing if we could memorize it, or at the very least understand it. Why do I recite it at the beginning of every lecture? My teacher recites at the beginning of every one of his lectures, and his teacher also. Allahumma akhrijna min dhulumat al-wahm. Lord, remove us from the darknesses of imagination, or for us to be deluded or deceived. We're saying, Allah, deliver us from that. Don't let us be deceived. I want to see things as they really are. Allahumma akhrijna min dhulumat al-wahm wa akrimna bi-nur al-fahm. And Lord, grace us with the light of understanding. So this is a dua that one recites to receive knowledge. So since we are using our time here to receive knowledge, and we've been speaking about what happens when one is receiving knowledge, is a very beautiful process that Allah is affecting you directly at all times, then we're saying, Lord, remove us from the delusions, the darkness of delusion, and allow me to have the light of understanding. Allahumma akhrijna min dhulumat al-wahm wa akrimna bin-nur al-fahm. Allahumma aftah alayna abwaba rahmatik. Lord, open for us the gates of your mercy. Wanshur alayna min khaza'ini ulumik. And sprinkle upon us from the treasures of your knowledge. So we are asking for him to give us from his treasures of knowledge, his cabinet of knowledge. So this is a really beautiful dua that we begin with, and I'm reciting it on behalf of everyone. It would be good for all of us to learn it. It's a very special dua. And it's timely because we've been discussing the two main values that we want to use in order to know our life mission statement as individuals, as families, and as a community. Those two values being knowledge and love. And today I want to combine the two. So I spoke a lot about love in the beginning of the series, and a lot about knowledge in the second half of the series. Today I want to bring those two together, so we understand, as we are in this process of Jihad al-Akbar, as I mentioned last night, and we're between those two camps, Junud al-Shaytan and Junud al-Rahman, the soldiers of Satan and the soldiers of the Merciful One, that we know our road is one where knowledge is combined with love as the path of Islam. من عرف نفسه فقد عرف ربه. This is a very famous hadith. All of us probably know it. He who knows himself knows his Lord. It's very interesting. Why do you think that when you know yourself, you'll know Allah? How does that work? Have you given it some thought before? How does it work that when you know yourself, because A'udhu Billah, God forbid, you know you're not Allah, but when you know yourself, you will know God. And the opposite is also true. If you never know yourself, if you don't know yourself, you will never know Allah and you won't know Allah. So then it's pretty important for us to begin to know ourselves. It's a pretty important, significant point that the Imam makes to us. Especially when we combine it with a lot of the other hadith we've been speaking about, al-mu'min mar'at akhihi al-mu'min, that the believer is the mirror of his believing brother or sister. Meaning that they allow you to know yourself more. When you look in the mirror, you know more of yourself. There's a lot that you didn't see before. Remember, you can't see what's on your face. When you look in the mirror, you see that. When you have a mirror, there might be something shown to you that you didn't notice before. So Your brother or your sister is a mirror for you to help you on the main aim, the primary aim, which is to know yourself more. And a lot of us live our lives unaware of ourselves, unconscious, living day after day without a conscious awareness of who I am and where I'm going and what I'm becoming. Whereas Islam often emphasizes that you must be constantly aware, as you mentioned, muraqabah, musharata, muraqabah, muhasabah. Muraqabah is to be constantly aware, constantly God conscious, and that's what fasting does for us. So you'll always see, subhanAllah, the program of Islam. There will be something like fasting, which someone who is not religious at all will come and will fast just because he's a Muslim and the family is a Muslim and they want to be part of this program. So fasting always brings someone back. Fasting was always for taqwa, لَعَلَّكُمْ تَتَّقُونَ, which means to constantly be aware of God's remembrance and presence and mercy. So we want to constantly be aware. We don't want to live this life through delusion. Allahumma akhrijna min dhulumat al-wahm. Remove us from the darkness of delusion. What does it mean to know myself? When I say I or me, myself, how much of myself do I know? Just a small experience that I went through. I studied religions, and part of my studies was the religion of Buddhism. And I studied Buddhism in China. I went to a monastery, a Buddhist monastery, and I studied Buddhism there. And at the time, I learnt meditation from the monks there, and it goes hand in hand with a lot of dhikr that we have in Islam. And during my practice of meditation, which is the understanding of thinking of one thought, they used to say over there that your mind is like a monkey. It's always jumping around, and the only way to calm monkey mind is to give monkey banana. And the banana that you give the monkey is, you give the mind one thought only. It's not that you think of nothing. You think of one thing and you stick to that one thing. So usually they use breath, right? And this is across all people can use. It's universal for people of all religions. To sit down, calm your mind, think of your breath, and think of nothing else. As soon as you start thinking of anything else, oh look, that's pretty, oh I see this, I see that, what am I having for dinner tonight? Then you lose it. You have to come back to the breath. What does it remind you of? I was really good at it. Why? Because I've been doing it all my life in salat. Right? Because in salat we're supposed to be thinking of one thing, of Allah only, and of nothing else. Not of iftar, not of anything, just Allah. So as Muslims, we've constantly been told since we were kids, think only of God when you're praying. Don't think of everything else. As Imam Khomeini calls it, ta'irul khayal, the bird of imagination. Starts flying around when you start praying. So we're supposed to think of one thing. So when I started with them, I was pretty good. And then day after day, I got better and better. Then the final week, 7 days, where we cut off all communication from each other. No phones, no laptops, nothing that you communicate with another person. You sit down on your own and you meditate morning to night. You only stop to go eat. Of course, I would go and pray and come back. Literally, all you do all day is follow your breath. Okay? So for the first 2 days, I was going quite insane. And then my mind calmed down because I wasn't getting bombarded with so much information the way we often are. When my mind calmed down, so much of what was inside started to come up. There were a lot of memories that I had I didn't know I had. Really funny memories as well. Things that were painful to me that I didn't realize. Because your body never forgets. So much is stored inside your body. Your mind doesn't forget. There are so many memories that you have right now that you don't know you have. And then you know when someone's memory unlocked or triggered, someone triggered a memory and you're like, oh yeah? But that's been there. You just weren't aware of it. Or even, let's say, a surah of the Quran that you memorized when you were a kid and you haven't heard or even recited in years and years, and then it comes up and then you finish it. It was stored inside, but where was it? Or you're watching a movie that you watched 10 years ago, and then the guy's about to say a line, and then you say it before him, and then he says the line, and you, how do I remember that? I haven't thought about that in 10 years. So the memories coming up for me were There was one memory when I was 7 years old and I was really upset with my mother because there was a chocolate cake that I wanted and she didn't give it to me. And I cried my eyes out that night. And it came up. And I thought, whoa, I didn't know, I still remembered that. That was 25 years ago. More and more came up. Of course, it was really emotional for me, so I cried a lot at the things that I was coming to. But you know what it showed me? How much I don't know myself. And how much work I have to do to get to know more about myself. What else is inside me that I don't know about? Because if I don't know myself, I won't know Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So, it's a challenge to you to sit down between yourself, you and yourself. And the best night to do that is on Laylatul Qadr. If you want to know what the best thing to do, the most beneficial thing that you can do on Laylatul Qadr, it's not all the du'as and all the salats. Take an hour and sit down by yourself. They say 1 hour of true contemplation, sincere contemplation is greater than 70 years of worship. So then imagine you times that by the night of Qadr by 1,000 nights. You're maxing it out. Contemplate upon who you are. There'll be so much you'll come to know. Your weaknesses, your strengths. I'll give you an example. A lot of the brothers or sisters that I deal with, I always find there is something that occurred in their life. A life decision that occurred that changed the trajectory of who they are completely. Small decisions that you think were insignificant, but they determine the person that you become. And a lot of them happen before you're 10 years old. So imagine 10-year-old you and 6-year-old you made a decision that impacted who you are now. And we usually never let a 6-year-old make a decision for us. But you've done that. And so you want to be aware of what decision you made so you can see if it's correct or if you should rectify it. For example, here's a few. It can happen in your teenage years. It can happen now. But usually it happens a lot before you're 10 years old. You might remember them, you might not. But here's a few examples that maybe will benefit. One brother told me, as we were assessing why he finds it so difficult to get close to other people, he said when he was 4 years old, there were a lot of fireworks outside. And he was really scared from the noise of the fireworks, so he went to his mother and said, "Mama, I'm scared." She said, "No, you're not, you're lying. Go back to sleep, you're just trying to stay awake." He was surprised by that reply because he was actually scared. So then he went to his father and said, "Baba, I'm scared because of the fireworks." And he said, "No, your mom said you're lying." And he's obviously not going to go against the boss of the house, the mom, right? And he said, "Go back to sleep. You're just trying to stay awake." And then he went to his brother and said, "I'm really scared." His brother said, "No, mom and dad said you're lying and you should go back to sleep. You're just trying to stay awake." He went to sleep that night. He said he remembered being in bed, 4 years old. He remembered being in bed and thinking to himself, true story, no one loves me. And I'm in this alone. And I have to take care of me. No one loves me. I'm in this alone and I take care of myself. He thought that and he really believed it. That was a decision that he made when he was 4 years old. The next day, obviously, he manifests that in his actions. He'll manifest that in the playground. He'll become unaware of that decision later on, but he made it. And so if he was going down a certain path, that decision determined a different path. He grows up, he gets married, he divorces, he finds it really hard to be close to anyone. And when we got to the bottom of that decision, as we sat down, he started bawling his eyes out. Bawling his eyes out. That's something that he thought of when he was 4. There's a lot of these. And they can really impact who you are if you don't figure them out. Another one, this is a really good brother. This brother, let's call him Adam. Adam Adam's a really good brother, always taking care of other people, does all his wajibat, gives a lot to charity, and he really takes care of his parents. He has a lot of love for his parents. I often notice that in him. And he's always taking care of his dad, who's quite sick. But he has this huge guilt on his shoulders all the time. And he always feels like, ultimately, God hates him. He feels like God doesn't like him. That God hates him. And he cries when he says this. He feels like no matter what I do, I feel like God hates me. I'm always guilty. Why? Have you done anything wrong? No. What's wrong? Why do you feel like God hates you? And when we got to the bottom of it, we realized that since he was young until now, his father, his sick father who he cares for, is always calling him names and is always making him feel insignificant and inferior, putting him down all the time. And so for a young boy like Adam, growing up, being put down by his dad again and again and again. Now Adam is about 30, but since he was 5, his dad's been telling him, you're not good enough, you're not good enough, you're this, you should have done this better, you should have done that better. That weighed heavily on him. But then I ask, why does that mirror onto God? Well, when you're young and you still don't know too much about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the closest thing to Allah is your mom and dad. That's what you see. Your dad is the one who gives you rizq. He provides for you, he feeds you. And he protects you when you're scared. He keeps you safe. And he's strong. Right? He's qawi. When I was a kid, my biggest dilemma was if my dad would have Goldberg in a wrestling match or not. Right? I didn't know, because my dad is the strongest, but I don't know, Goldberg looks a bit scary. Right? Because when you're a kid, you think your dad's the best. So what about when your dad starts telling you that you're not good enough? That really hurts. Your mom, she's Ar-Rahman Ar-Rahim. She's merciful, she gives you kindness, Ra'uf, Wadud, she gives you love. When you're a kid, when you want love, you want a lullaby, you go to your mother. Right? When you're a kid, your parents are what you know of God's names. Now when you grow up a little bit, you start to realize, okay, yeah, my parents, God forbid, they're not God, of course. God is Allah. It's not my parents. But that's why, as parents, we have to be so responsible about how we treat our children and what we show them about Allah. Because whatever we show them, that's the way they're going to see God when they graduate from our house. So the young Adam saw that his protector and the one that provides him rizq and the one that's supposed to be the strongest person in his life, he doesn't think he's good enough. No matter what he does, and as hard as he tries, he doesn't think that he's good enough. So he grows up and he has this idea that God hates him. It mirrored onto that. There are loads of these examples that I can give you. So many. That you can even have later on in life. If you ever had a broken heart, then at one point you decided, like Adam decided when he was a kid, I'm not good enough. He accepted what his dad told him. That's a life decision. We make a lot of these life decisions as we grow. If you ever fall in love and you don't end up with the person that you love and you become heartbroken, a lot of people make decisions when they're heartbroken. They say, never again. Never will I give my heart to another man or woman again, because I'm never going to accept my heart to be broken. And then they end up getting married to someone else, and they can't get too close because don't trust anyone. Because they have experience where they decided at one point in their lives, I will never trust again. And that will cause a barrier between the husband and the wife because of a decision that you made when you were younger. But you know, belief is like a table with 4 legs. If you take one of those legs out, those 4 legs are based on experiences. You have 4 experiences, you have a belief about something. It doesn't have to be a fact, it becomes a fact to you. If you take out some of those experiences, you can tear apart that table. That belief will no longer be there for you. It leaves your doctrine. There are a lot of beliefs that you carry with you. based on your experiences, based on decisions that you've made at times when you weren't fully aware that you were making a decision, especially when you were a child. So part of knowing yourself is to know about those decisions. Think about where you are right now, who you are right now. Think about the main trait that you have and how you came to that trait. Think about where that came from and that decision that you made. Was it a correct decision that is benefiting your life, or does it not serve you? If it doesn't serve you, then what's the answer? Because I'm sure now you want to think about that. You make a new decision whilst you're aware. That's how you change it. Very simple. You can be going down a trajectory for 20 years based on a decision that you made 20 years prior, and then you decide, you realize that it was an incorrect belief, and you make a new decision, this time conscious, not unconscious. You make a new conscious decision about where you want to take yourself. Life decisions have a huge significance on who you are. And if we don't take control of them, and if we don't first even identify them, then we will never know who we are. And if we never know who we are, we will never know who God is. You know who made a really important life decision when they were very young? Salman. Salman al-Farisi, otherwise known as Salman al-Muhammadi. You guys know Salman? Salman is the most amazing companion of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam.
Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.
Salman was a very young boy. He was 16 years old when he was training to be a Zoroastrian priest. His father was an aristocrat. Salman was 16. For 3 years he trained till he was 19. Zoroastrian priest in modern day Iran. From this aristocrat family, his father had a lot of business deals that he was doing. And so one day he asked Salman to go into town and finish off a business deal for him. Salman was 19. Salman goes into town. On the way, he heard some noises, some beautiful sounds coming from a temple, a building he hadn't seen before, different to his Zoroastrian building. He opens the doors and he sees a choir, and he sees them singing about Jesus Christ. The Christians. He hadn't met any Christians before. So he goes inside and he starts speaking to these Christians, asking them what they're doing. They tell him, we're singing. For who? For Jesus. And they tell him about their belief about Jesus. And he was so touched, and his heart was fluttering when they spoke about Isa. He fell in love with Isa. That night he went back to his father and he told him, I just met these amazing people that were singing beautiful songs about a man named Jesus. And he fell in love. And his father told him, don't ever go to that place again. I forbid you. But Salman was a truth seeker. He decided, he made a life decision right there and then that he was always going to look for the truth, wherever his heart took him. So he told his father, no, I'm going back. I have to find out more. So his father, when he realized that he was going to commit blasphemy against the Zoroastrian religion, he had Salman tied up in the dungeon of his own home until he began to see differently. Now this was a really nice house that they lived in. It had its own dungeon. Salman had a bodyguard. The bodyguard had raised Salman since he was young, and this hurt him a lot to see Salman chained as a punishment from his father. So he told him, listen, if you want, I can go and communicate with those people, those Christians for you. if you send me a message. He told him, tell them I want to leave, and I will go with them if they want to go. So the bodyguard went, he corresponded. Apparently they were leaving, they were going to Iraq. So he told Salman, he said, I will let you out on a night and you can go and join them. So that happened. He released him in the middle of the night. Salman left. He made a big decision because that means he can never come back. Then he went with the Christians and they went to Iraq. And he spent the next 10 years in Iraq, becoming a Christian priest. Now he's 30 years old. He moves to Syria, continuing his studies, another 10 years. He's 40 years old. 20 years he's been studying as a priest, a Christian priest. He was a Christian for 20 years. But remember the decision that he made when he was young? He's going to look for the truth. Wherever he found it, wherever he saw it. And he always knew there was something missing from this Christian tradition. It didn't make full sense to him because Jesus is not the Son of God, but was the closest thing to truth that you could find. Then he moved to Palestine. He was a seeker, always moving, always learning. Now he was with his teacher. His teacher was on his deathbed. His teacher in Palestine, now Salman's an older man, he's about 55, 50 years old. His teacher tells him, there's been word of a messenger of God speaking the word of God. And he has a mark on his neck, a mark of prophethood. And he doesn't take sadaqah, he doesn't take charity. He's telling him what he's heard of him. And it seems like he's the real deal. And Salman couldn't believe it. Finally, what he's been waiting for. What's his name? And the priest told him his name is Muhammad. So Salman says, where can I find him? He told him, if you go into Arabia, you can find him. In Mecca. So Salman goes and looks for a way to get to Mecca. He finds these Jewish travelers who told him they were going to Mecca and they would take him for a fee. And Salman, he had really broad shoulders and a broad chest. He was a really big man, strong man. And so they saw him and they realized that he could be a cash cow because they were in the slave trade. But he didn't know that. So he paid them. And he joined their caravan to go to Mecca. But in the middle of the night, as he was sleeping, they chained him. And they made him a slave. And they took him to another town instead. Imagine he had wanted to go to see the Prophet, and now he had become a slave. From leaving his family early on, to going and becoming a priest, a Christian priest, traveling all these lands, and then now he's a slave. They take him to Medina, right? So subhanAllah, that's where the Prophet ends up. But that wasn't in the books for Salman. He just had a pure intention. And Salman goes to Medina and he is enslaved and sold as a slave, and he works as a slave for the next 2 years. He learns the Arabic language. He's a very smart man. He's a priest. He's a noble man. He's from an aristocrat family, and now he's enslaved. And one day, as he was bringing the dates from the tree, he heard his master speaking about someone who was on the outskirts of the city, saying, this man's causing so many problems for us. He's claiming that he's a prophet, and he's come from Mecca, he's coming in, and he's on the outskirts right now. You know when he was waiting for Imam Ali alayhi salam in Qibla? He was waiting for Imam Ali. Rasulullah was waiting for Imam Ali there at the outskirts of Medina. He wouldn't go inside without Imam Ali alayhi salam, because Imam Ali had slept in his bed. And the Prophet said, I won't go inside except with the one who gave his life for my life. So the Prophet was waiting outside. When Salman heard this, he became so excited, he ran down from his tree and he said, what's his name? What's his name? And so someone said, Muhammad. Salman became so happy, but his master struck him at that point. He said, what's it to you? What's his name? Get back to your room. But Salman didn't care. He went back, and that night, all he kept thinking about was the name Muhammad, 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 because he felt that tomorrow, finally, I'm going to see him. He's going to find a way to go and see him. So he waited for his opportunity. The days went by. He waited and waited and waited. When he heard that the Prophet had entered Medina, then Salman made a run for it. And he noticed the people crowding around Prophet Muhammad. And he wanted to be sure. So he approached and he looked and he saw a little mark on his neck. And then he had some food with him that he brought, the dates. And when it was his turn to come and speak to the Prophet, he offered him the dates as sadaqah. So the Prophet took it and then gave it to his friends. And Salman's like, okay, this is him. Then he gave him other dates and then the Prophet ate it because he gave it to him as a gift. When he was finally in that presence of Rasulullah, imagine he's been searching for 50 years for the truth because of a decision that he made when he was young. Searching for the Prophet, finally he sees him right in front of him. And you can only imagine the way in which he finally drops to his knees. Now the hadith doesn't tell us about how he does this, but you can only imagine. I always think about the way he does this. I said, Ya Rasulullah, I was an aristocrat in Iran and then I became a slave and then I went and I became free. And the Prophet would be with him and hug him. And he told him, I'm a slave now. I've been enslaved. And the Prophet said, don't worry. We will free you. Take me to your master. So Salman goes with Rasulullah and all the hundreds of Muslims. And they go. And the Prophet says to his owner, Harith, he tells him, how much for this man? He tells him, it's too expensive. How much? He said, this much gold and 300 palm trees. Prophet said, fine, the gold's on me. Then he said to the Muslims, which one of you will donate some palm trees? And one would say, I have 10 palm trees, Ya Rasulullah. I have 20 palm trees, Ya Rasulullah. You know, the same way we do here, right? Ya Rasulullah, 30 palm trees. Then they made 300 palm trees. Then they freed Salman. And Salman, this man, wasn't like any man. Salman was so close to the Prophet. Because all the tribes, they would want to make Salman part of their tribe. He was such an attractive, charismatic, knowledgeable and spiritual figure. So he'd say, Salman's from us, Salman's from us. The Prophet would come and say, no. Salman minna ahl al-bayt. He'd say, he's from us. That's why they called him Salman al-Muhammadi. It changed from Farisi, Salman the Persian, became Salman al-Muhammad. Because he became from Ahlul Bayt. That means that if we can make a decision about who we are and what we're going to seek in our lives, and if it's going to be Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for sure, and we align our minds and our hearts, because it needs love. Salman can't do all of this with just knowledge alone. It needs love too. It's love. Love is that which draws him. It's a magnet. Then perhaps one day, if we are orphans, knocking on the door of the Ahlul Bayt, and we know the Ahlul Bayt don't refuse and reject the orphan, perhaps we can be of Ahlul Bayt too. I overran a little bit on the time, but Brother Nasir Hussain and his family have sponsored tonight's iftar, and it will be on the behalf of Marhum Gul Hussain and all of your marhameen, inshallah. If we can recite a Fatiha after salawat ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. صلوا على محمد وآل محمد.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد.
محمد وآل محمد. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. I'd like to invite the brothers from Al-Ain Society to come up to give a short speech. Namaz is at 8:15 or 8:17 today, so just Muhammad wa ali Muhammad sallallahu alaihi
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والصلاة والسلام على محمد وعلى آل محمد الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين. أفلح من صلى على محمد وآل محمد. My dear brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. I am here as part of Al-Ain Social Care Foundation. Now Al-Ain, as some of you might know, is a charity which has enjoyed the direct support and blessings of Ayatollah Syed Sistani, may Allah prolong his life, and has served and supported over 76,000 orphans who lost their fathers in the fight against ISIS. The project in this holy month, the month of Ramadan, is to complete the remaining 12 of 16 luminous star centers to provide services such as mental health